She sat in that lobby chair for 91 minutes. The assistant manager walked past her 4 times. He smiled every single time. A real smile. The warm kind. The kind that makes you feel bad about being impatient. Twice he stopped to apologize. He told her the core system was running slow that morning. He told her they were doing everything they could. He was lying, and she knew he was lying, and she did not say a word about it. Because what Brent Kessler could not have known, what nothing about the woman in the plain gray coat, holding her papers in a plastic folder, would ever have told him, was that she had spent 26 years of her life reading bank files for the government of the United States. She was not waiting. She was counting. By the time he finally called her name, she had written down 11 things in a small notebook, and any one of them, on its own, would have been nothing at all. Together, they ended his career. The Cypress Creek branch of Titan Regional Bank sat on the corner of Magnolia and 4th in Bellwood, Texas, population 19,000, an hour and a half northeast of Houston, in the part of the state where the pine country begins and the land stops being flat. It was a good-looking building. Red brick, white columns out front that held up nothing whatsoever, a flagpole, and a drive-through with 2 lanes and a pneumatic tube that children still found fascinating. Inside, it smelled like carpet cleaner and coffee, and there was a bowl of butterscotch candies on the counter that had been refilled every Monday morning for as long as anyone could remember. At 9:04 on a Tuesday morning in early October, a woman walked in and took the chair by the window. She was 58 years old, and she looked, at a glance, like 100 other women who came through that door in a given month. Gray wool coat, 3 winters old, 1 button replaced with a near match. Flat shoes, reading glasses on a chain, no handbag, just a document wallet, the clear plastic kind you buy at a drugstore for $4, with a snap flap and a bank statement visible through the front. The receptionist gave her a clipboard. She wrote her name in careful print. Mercer, Della R. Purpose of visit, small business loan inquiry. Then she sat down, folded her hands over the folder in her lap, and began to watch the room. Here is what most people do in a bank lobby. They look at their phone. They look at the ceiling. They look at nothing, and they wait for their name, and afterward they could not tell you a single thing about the 20 minutes they spent in that room. Della Mercer had been trained out of that a very long time ago. She started with the physical layout because that is where you always start. 4 teller windows, 2 staffed, 3 desk stations along the east wall for personal bankers, all 3 occupied, 2 glass-walled offices at the back. The one on the left had a brass nameplate reading H. Duffy, branch manager. The one on the right read B. Kessler, assistant manager. The blinds in Kessler's office were open. That was the first thing she wrote down. Then she began to count. Not people. Anyone can count people. She counted transitions. She counted the number of seconds between a customer sitting down at a desk station and the banker's hands going to the keyboard. She counted how long the printer behind the tellers ran. She counted the number of times a laminated card reading, "Please see a banker," was carried from the counter to a chair. And she wrote down times, not approximate times, exact ones, off the wall clock, and cross-checked against her own watch, which she had synchronized that morning against the atomic clock signal, because that was also something she had been trained to do a very long time ago. 9:11, customer at station 2, banker keying within 40 seconds, system responsive. 9:19, wire transfer completed, window 1, printer active, core system online. 9:26, assistant manager exits office, passes waiting area, does not look. 9:41, loan approval, Kessler's office, handshake at door, applicant departs with folder. She underlined that last one twice, because it mattered enormously that the core system had been used, successfully, to approve a loan at 9:41 in the morning. And because of who had walked out of that office holding the folder. You need to understand Brent Kessler, and to understand him you have to set aside every picture in your head of what a man like this is supposed to look like. He was 41. He had a good handshake, and a better memory. He coached the 11 and under baseball team at Bellwood Parks and Rec and had done for 6 seasons, unpaid, in the Texas heat. He brought a box of donuts into the branch every Monday morning out of his own pocket. He remembered the names of his customers' children, and he asked about them, and he wanted to know the answers. He had never once in his life said a word that any reasonable person would call bigoted. Not to a customer, not to a teller, not at a backyard barbecue with 3 beers in him. If you had accused him of it, he would have been genuinely, deeply wounded, and the wound would have been real. This is the part people get wrong. They imagine that the man doing this kind of harm must be snarling. They imagine he must be obvious, so that we would all recognize him, and none of us would ever be fooled. It is a comfortable thing to imagine, and it is almost never true. Brent Kessler never denied anybody anything. He helped them. He would come out from behind his desk and sit down in the chair beside you, angled toward you, not across a desk, but next to you, like a friend. He would look at your numbers with a small, worried frown, the way a doctor looks at an X-ray, and then he would tell you the truth as he had decided to arrange it. Your coverage ratio's a little thin for what our underwriting's looking for this quarter. I hate this. I've been fighting the home office on these guidelines all year. Here's what I don't want. I don't want you to put in a formal application and take a hard pull on your credit and have it come back denied, because that follows you. That's on your report for 2 years. I'm not going to do that to you. Let me make a call. There's a group over in Beaumont that's a lot more flexible with small business. Doyle over there is a friend of mine, and he'll take care of you. And he would slide a card across the desk. Lone Star Capital Partners, Commercial Lending Solutions. Then he would walk you to the door with his hand almost but not quite on your shoulder, and you would drive home believing that a man at a bank had gone out of his way for you, and you would tell your wife about it over dinner. The interest rate at Lone Star Capital Partners was 29%. Doyle Prescott, who owned it, was married to Brent Kessler's older sister, and for every borrower Kessler routed there, Prescott paid him $1,500, invoiced through a marketing consultancy that had no employees, no website, and 1 client. Over 5 years and 4 months, that came to $321,000. The bakery on Magnolia Street had a wooden sign above the door that read, "Pruitt's" in hand-painted gold letters, and the sign was older than most of the people who walked under it. Ruth Pruitt had put it up in 1974, when the building was a shoe repair with a bad roof, and she had $1,100 and a recipe for pound cake she would not write down for anybody, including her own daughter, until 1991. Yolanda Pruitt took over in 2003. She was 61 years old the autumn this story concerns, and she had run that bakery through 2 recessions, 1 flood, a hurricane, and the 14 months in 2020 when she sold bread out of a folding table on the sidewalk and did not lay off 1 single person. She had 9 years of clean books, a credit score of 704. 4 employees, 2 of them full-time with insurance she paid for herself. What she wanted was $40,000, $30,000 for a second-deck oven, because the one she had was 22 years old and had started throwing its temperature by 40 degrees on the left side, which meant every wedding cake was a coin flip. $10,000 for a used delivery van, because the hospital had asked her to supply their cafeteria, and she could not take the contract without a way to get bread across town at 5 in the morning. She put on her church clothes for the appointment. She brought 3 years of tax returns, her profit and loss statements, a signed letter of intent from the hospital's food services director, and photographs of the oven. Brent Kessler was extremely kind to her. He came around the desk and sat in the chair next to hers. He looked at the hospital letter and said, "That's wonderful. That's a real vote of confidence." He asked about the bakery. He said his mother-in-law swore by the caramel cake. He spent 4 minutes with her documents. Then he made the small, worried frown. "Yolanda, I'm going to be straight with you, because I think you deserve straight. Food service is a tough category for us right now. Home office tightened the guidelines in March, and I've been fighting them on it. Your collateral position on the building is thinner than it looks because of the 19 refinance." And here's what I don't want to do to you. I don't want to run this through formal and have it come back declined, because then you've got a denial on your file, and that makes the next place harder. Let me make a call." She took the card. She drove to Beaumont 11 days later and signed with Lone Star Capital Partners for $40,000 at 29%, with a personal guarantee and a lien on the building. And she signed it because she had a hospital contract sitting on her desk with a start date on it, and the deck oven had failed twice more that month. She made the payments for 11 months. In month 12, the van's transmission went. In month 13, her right knee gave out, and she was 2 weeks out of the kitchen. And Pruitt's without Yolanda in the kitchen was a bakery that sold about 60% as much. In month 14, she missed a payment, and the default rate on that note took the interest to 34%. She sold the building in April. The wooden sign came down on a Wednesday morning. Her nephew took it off the brackets with a socket wrench while she stood on the sidewalk, and she made him be careful with it, and then she put it in the back of her car and drove home and did not get out of the car for a while. Here is the number that matters, and it is the reason this story exists. If Titan Regional Bank had approved Yolanda Pruitt's $40,000 at the rate her file actually qualified for, and her file qualified, her monthly payment would have been $641. At Lone Star, it was $1,288. She did not lose that bakery because of a recession, or a bad knee, or a transmission. She lost it over $647 a month, and a card slid across a desk by a man who coached Little League. Reginald Boone was 45 and ran a heating and air business with 11 employees and a yard full of trucks he kept painted. The Bellwood Independent School District put out a bid package that spring for HVAC service across 9 campuses, 3 years, renewable. It was the kind of contract that changes what a small company is. He had the crews. He had the certifications. What he needed was a $120,000 equipment line to satisfy the bonding requirement. Kessler was sorry. Kessler was so sorry. Kessler had been fighting the home office all year. Boone applied twice. He never received a written notice of denial for either application, which he found strange, and mentioned to his wife, and then forgot about, because he had a bid deadline and 11 people on payroll. He missed the deadline by 9 days. He laid off 4 men that August. One of them, a 26-year-old named Trey Alcorn, had closed on a house in June. Camille Ortiz was 24 and had worked the teller line at the Cypress Creek branch for 2 years and 7 months. She was good at it. She was fast, she was accurate, she was the one they put on the window when a difficult customer came in, and she was saving for a certificate program in Houston. And she noticed things, because tellers notice everything. Tellers see who comes in, who they talk to, how long it takes, and what expression is on their face when they leave. Tellers are the most under-observed intelligence apparatus in American commercial life. What Camille Ortiz noticed was the cards. She started keeping a list in the Notes app on her phone in February. By June, it had 41 names on it, and she had noticed the thing that made her stomach turn over. It was not everybody who got the Lone Star card. She filed her first internal complaint on the 11th of June through the Employee Ethics Portal, which the annual compliance training video described as confidential and independent. It was neither. The portal routed branch-level reports to branch management for initial assessment. Titan Regional had 206 branches and 11 people in corporate compliance, and somebody in 2016 had built a workflow that pushed the first review down to the local level in the interest of efficiency. So Camille Ortiz's confidential ethics complaint about Brent Kessler arrived, 40 minutes after she submitted it, in the email inbox of the assistant branch manager, Brent Kessler. He was lovely about it. He came out to the teller line the following Tuesday and asked if she had a minute, and in the break room he told her he'd seen a report come through, and he wanted her to know he thought it was great that she was paying attention. That's exactly what they needed, and that there was some context she didn't have about lending guidelines that he'd be happy to walk her through any time. Then he asked, warmly, how the certificate program was going, and whether she still needed that schedule accommodation for her Thursday night class. She filed a second complaint on the 4th of August. It named 11 customers and included dates. Nothing happened. 2 weeks later, her Thursday accommodation was withdrawn for scheduling reasons. She dropped the class. She did not file a third complaint. But before she submitted each one, Camille Ortiz printed a copy. She dated it by hand at the top. She attached screenshots of her phone list, printed on the break room printer at 6:40 in the morning when nobody was in the branch. She put both packets in a shoebox under her bed, in an apartment on Sycamore Street, next to her tax returns and her grandmother's rosary. She did it because when she was 16 and starting her first job, her mother had sat her down at the kitchen table and told her something that Rosalind Ortiz had learned the hard way from a landlord in 1998. You keep a copy of everything you put your name on. Everything, mija. You may never need it, but the day you need it, nothing else will do. Remember the shoebox. Everything in this story comes down to that shoebox. Della Mercer had not planned to be in that lobby. She had spent 26 years as a national bank examiner with the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, which is the federal agency that supervises the nation's banks and which almost no American outside of banking could name if you offered them money. She had retired 2 years earlier at 56, with a pension and a bad shoulder, and an intention to finally learn to garden. The gardening lasted 5 months. In March, a friend from her OCC days, who had moved to the Civil Rights Division at the Department of Justice, called and asked her to consult on a fair lending investigation in East Texas. Complaints had come in, not many, 6 over 3 years, which is not many at all, but 2 of them had the same lender's name in them, and somebody had gotten curious. Della's job was not to be in the chair. Her job was to design and train. The method is called a matched pair test, and it is old, and it is elegant, and it has been used in housing and lending enforcement for 50 years. You send 2 people into the same institution within a short window. You construct their financial profiles so that they are equivalent in every respect that is supposed to matter: income, credit, collateral, time in business, with one deliberate difference. You make the second profile slightly weaker. Then you see what happens. Della had trained 11 testers over the summer. She wrote the scripts. She built the profiles. She drilled them on the one rule that matters more than all the others. You do not lead the witness. You do not complain. You do not push. You ask the ordinary questions an ordinary applicant asks, and you take what you are given, and you write it down afterward in your car. The Cypress Creek test was scheduled for the first Tuesday in October. The control applicant, the white male profile, weaker file, credit score 661, was a retired insurance adjuster named Gary Lindholm, who was a paid tester and had done 9 of these. The second tester, the one with the stronger file, called Della at 6:20 that morning from an emergency room in Conroe. Her mother had fallen in the night. Della had already driven 3 hours. Lindholm's appointment was at 9:20 and could not be moved without blowing the pairing. She sat in her car in the parking lot of a hardware store and thought about it for 4 minutes. Then she drove to a discount store, bought a plastic document wallet for $4, transferred the prepared file into it, took off her good earrings and put them in the console, and walked into the Cypress Creek branch of Titan Regional Bank at 9:04 in the morning. She was, by a considerable margin, the most qualified bank examiner ever to sit in that lobby. She had also just made a decision that her friend at the Civil Rights Division would later describe, in an email she was never supposed to see, as the single most useful thing anybody did in this entire investigation, and God help me if she'd told me first. At 9:20, Gary Lindholm walked in. Della did not look up. She turned a page in the loose newspaper she had picked up from the side table, and she watched the reflection in the window glass beside her, which had been the reason she chose that chair. Lindholm gave his name at the counter. He waited 4 minutes. At 9:24, Brent Kessler came out of his office with his hand already extended and walked him back and closed the door. At 9:41, The door opened again. There was a handshake that went on a beat longer than a handshake needs to. Lindholm came out holding a folder with the bank's logo on it, and Kessler stood in his doorway and pointed at him and said something that made them both laugh. 22 minutes, door to door. Gary Lindholm walked out with a conditional approval for $45,000. Credit score 661. 2 years in his business. Collateral position weaker than the profile in Della Mercer's plastic folder in every measurable respect. She wrote down the time. She underlined it twice. Then she sat and she waited, and the clock on the wall went around. At 9:26, Kessler had walked past her the first time, going to the copier. He did not look at the waiting area. At 10:02, he walked past going the other way, and this time he did look, and he stopped. And he came over with a wonderful smile and said, "Ma'am, I am so sorry. Our core system is dragging this morning. It's been like this since we opened. We're on with IT. Can I get you a coffee?" She said, "No, thank you very much." She wrote down 10:02. Told core system down since opening. 21 minutes after approving a loan on it. At 10:29, he passed again and made a rueful face and held up 2 fingers to indicate 2 more minutes. At 10:47, he passed again and did not make eye contact. In between, she counted. Between 9:04 and 10:35, from the chair by the window, Della Mercer observed the Cypress Creek branch of Titan Regional Bank complete. On its core system, 1 wire transfer, 2 certificates of deposit, 4 account openings, a safe deposit box access, and a loan approval for $45,000. She wrote down all 11. At 10:35, Brent Kessler called her name. He was very good. She had to give him that. He came out to get her personally rather than sending anyone. He apologized twice on the walk back. He held the office door. He did not sit behind the desk. He pulled a second chair around to the side, so they were sitting at an angle to each other, no furniture between them, and he leaned forward with his forearms on his knees, and his whole body said, "I'm on your side of this table." "Mrs. Mercer, first of all, an hour and a half. That's not who we are. I apologize." "That's all right. Tell me about the business," she told him. Home Health Staffing Agency, 6 years, 11 contract nurses, expanding into 2 neighboring counties, needed $40,000 for a working capital line to cover the payroll gap between service delivery and insurance reimbursement, which in that industry runs about 70 days. It was a good file. Della had built it herself, and she had built it to be boring, which is the highest compliment a bank examiner can pay a loan application. Credit score 738. 6 years in business. Receivables to pledge. Debt service coverage ratio of 1.9. Kessler took the folder from her and went through it. She timed it. 4 minutes and 10 seconds. Then he made the small worried frown. "Okay, so here's where I'm at." He tapped the profit and loss statement with 2 fingers. "Healthcare staffing is a tough category for us right now. It's a receivables-heavy model, and Home Office tightened the guidelines on that in March. I've been fighting them on it all year, and I'll tell you honestly it's frustrating, because I look at this and I see a business that works." "I see. And here's what I really don't want to do." He sat back. "I don't want to run this through formal and have it come back declined. Because then that's a hard inquiry and a denial sitting on your file for 2 years, and that makes every other door harder to open. I'm not going to do that to you." "That's thoughtful. Let me make a call for you instead." He reached into his shirt pocket and came out with a business card and slid it across the corner of the desk with 1 finger. "Lone Star Capital Partners, Commercial Lending Solutions. D. Prescott. Doyle's a friend of mine. Been in this business 20 years. They're a lot more flexible on receivables than we're allowed to be, and he'll take good care of you. Tell him I sent you." Della Mercer looked at the card. She did not pick it up. "Mr. Kessler," she said, "may I ask you 2 questions?" "Absolutely. The first one, did you open my file before this morning?" He smiled, a little puzzled. "Sorry? You had my name and my purpose of visit at 9:04 this morning. It's now 10:41. Did anyone at this branch pull my credit, look at my business, or open a single document in that hour and a half?" The smile stayed exactly where it was, which is what a smile does when the man behind it has stopped thinking about smiling. "Ma'am, I told you. Our system's been—" "That's my second question." She reached into the plastic folder. "Your core system has been down since you opened this morning?" "It has. It's been a nightmare, and I—" She took out a single sheet of paper. She placed it face down on the desk between them. Then she turned it over. It was a conditional loan approval, generated on the Titan Regional Core Lending Platform, for $45,000, dated that day. Applicant, Lindholm, Gary W. Credit score, 661. Time in business, 26 months. Debt service coverage ratio, 1.2. Timestamp on the approval, 09/41/17. And in the lower right corner, in the field marked Approving Officer, were the initials BK. The room got very quiet. "That gentleman was in this office for 22 minutes, Della said. "I was in your lobby for 91. Kessler did not move. "Mr. Kessler, I spent 26 years reading files like the one in that folder. I read them for the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency. I have examined this bank." She let that land. "You didn't lose my file this morning." She stood up and buttoned her plain gray coat. "You never opened it." Brent Kessler believed, right up until a Thursday afternoon in February, that he had been careful. His reasoning was not stupid. It was the reasoning of a man who has thought hard about the shape of a trap and has simply looked at the wrong part of it. Nothing is in writing. He never wrote a discriminatory word because he never wrote anything. He never entered the applications into the system, so there were no denials to analyze. He never sent a decline letter, so there were no documents to compare. He intercepted people in a chair beside his desk with his voice, and voices leave no residue. If there is no file, there is no pattern. If there is no pattern, there is no case. Here is what he did not know. Under the Equal Credit Opportunity Act, when a creditor takes adverse action on a credit application, it is required to provide the applicant with written notice within 30 days, stating the specific principal reasons for the denial. Not general reasons, specific ones. This is not optional, it is not discretionary, and it has been federal law since 1974. And the law does not care whether you called it an application. It cares what the applicant reasonably believed they were doing when they sat down in your office with their tax returns and asked you for money. Every single one of Brent Kessler's careful, unwritten, friendly, no-paper conversations was an application, which meant that every single one of them required a notice, which meant that 214 times over 5 years, Brent Kessler had failed to generate a document that federal law required him to generate. And an absence, if it happens 214 times, is not an absence anymore. It is a shape. Della Mercer explained this to the investigative team in a conference room in Houston on a Thursday in November, standing at a whiteboard with a marker, in the flat, unhurried voice of a woman who had explained things to bankers for 26 years and had stopped being surprised by any of it. "He thinks the absence of a record protects him," she said. "The absence is the record." She drew a column on the left. Applicants who received written adverse action notices. She drew a column on the right. Applicants who received a Lone Star Capital business card and nothing else. "Now," she said, "let's sort both columns by who the applicant was." Because that was the second thing Kessler had not understood. He had believed that he had left no trail. What he had actually left was a footprint of exactly one shape, 214 times, all of them pointing the same direction. Of the 214 applicants who came to Brent Kessler's desk and left with a business card instead of a decision, 191 were Black or Hispanic. Of the 406 applicants he entered into the system and processed formally, 368 were white. Della put the cap back on the marker. "That's the case," she said. "Everything else is arithmetic." Except it wasn't, because 2 weeks later, the arithmetic broke. The Cypress Creek branch used a customer flow management system, the little kiosk by the door where you tap a screen and it prints you a ticket. It logs everything: arrival time, stated purpose, which employee you were routed to, how long you waited, how long you were with them, and when you left. It is, for an investigator, the closest thing that exists to a videotape of who walked into a bank and what happened to them. Titan Regional's vendor contract set the retention period at 90 days. Not for any sinister reason. Nobody had chosen it to hide anything. It was a line item in a licensing agreement signed in 2018 by a procurement officer who was weighing storage costs against a compliance minimum, and 90 days met the minimum, and it saved $11,000 a year across 206 branches. Della had 8 months of flow data, because the Department of Justice had issued a preservation letter the week after her visit. She needed 4 years. Everything before the 1st of February was gone. Permanently. Overwritten in a data center in Plano by the ordinary operation of a system doing exactly what it had been configured to do. Which meant that 70% of the pattern, the 70% that included Yolanda Pruitt and Reginald Boone and 141 other people, existed nowhere except in the memories of the applicants themselves and in whatever Brent Kessler chose to say about it. And Brent Kessler had retained excellent counsel and was saying nothing at all. That was the first blow. The second one was worse, and it landed in December, and Della Mercer did not sleep properly for 11 days afterward. To build the criminal case, the Honest Services wire fraud case against Kessler and Prescott, the one that would actually put 2 men in a federal facility rather than simply cost a bank money, the government needed to prove the kickback arrangement. The invoices from the Shell marketing consultancy were suggestive. They were not conclusive. $1,500 for marketing consultation is a number a good defense attorney can stand in front of a jury and explain for 40 minutes. What the government needed was somebody inside who could say, "I saw the referrals go out, and I saw the money come back, and here is how it worked." There was exactly one such person. Hal Duffy, branch manager, 63 years old, 31 years with Titan Regional, 6 years from a full pension. And Hal Duffy's signature was on 63 of the adverse action files. Not because he had done anything. That was the whole miserable point. Duffy was a decent, tired man who had come up in a version of banking that had stopped existing around 2009, who had a wife with a chronic illness and a daughter in her 2nd year of law school, and who was managing a branch with a staffing model built for a branch 2/3 its size. Brent Kessler brought him paper. Kessler was efficient. Kessler was liked. Kessler had never given him a reason to look twice. So Hal Duffy signed what was put in front of him, 63 times. Which made him, under federal banking law, a person with signature authority over discriminatory credit decisions, and therefore a person who could be charged. His attorney told him to invoke the 5th Amendment and say nothing, which was correct advice, and he took it. The meeting happened in a Justice Department conference room on the 14th floor in Houston on a gray Tuesday in December, and it went on for 3 hours. The prosecutors made their case, and their case was not unreasonable. Charge Duffy, not to convict him, to move him. Put the exposure in front of him, give him a week with his lawyer, and he will come to the table, because 63 counts against a 63-year-old man with a sick wife is not a thing anybody fights. Then you have your insider. You have the kickback structure, and you have Kessler and Prescott. It was, in prosecutorial terms, an obvious call. Della Mercer sat at the far end of that table for 2 hours and 40 minutes and said almost nothing. Then somebody asked her directly, and she took off her reading glasses and folded them and said, "You're right that it would work. I want to be clear that I'm not arguing it wouldn't work. But we would be doing to Hal Duffy exactly what Brent Kessler did to 191 people." She looked down the table. We'd be making a decision about a man based on which side of it is convenient for us, and then finding the paperwork to support it afterward. That's the whole crime we're here about. He signed 63 denials, Della. He did, and if you want to end his career and take his pension for that, I won't say a word against it, because I think there's a real argument that 31 years of authority means 31 years of responsibility. She put her glasses back on. But you're not proposing that. You're proposing to charge him with something you don't believe he did in order to make him afraid enough to hand you somebody else. And I've spent 2 years of my life on this case because I object to people being processed instead of considered. The room was quiet for a while. So what do you suggest? And this is the part Della hated, and this is the part she said out loud anyway, because she had been an examiner for 26 years and had never once had the luxury of pretending that a difficult thing was not the correct thing. I don't have an alternative. If you charge him, I'll help you charge him. I'm telling you what it costs so that nobody in this room gets to be surprised by it later. She drove back to her hotel in Beaumont that night and sat on the end of the bed with the lights off and did the arithmetic. 191 people on one side. One tired man with a sick wife on the other. She knew what the arithmetic said. She had known before she opened her mouth. She did not like the woman the arithmetic was asking her to be, and she sat there in the dark for a long time with that, and at some point past 2 in the morning she said out loud, to nobody, the thing that had been sitting underneath all of it. There has to be somebody else. There was. Her name was Camille Ortiz. She was 24 years old, and on the 9th of January she called the number on a Department of Justice notice that had been mailed to every current and former employee of the Cypress Creek branch. She almost didn't. She had read the letter 3 times over 4 days and put it back in the drawer twice. She still worked there. She had a certificate program to pay for, and the last 2 times she had said something, the confidential ethics portal had delivered her name directly to the man she was reporting. What made her pick up the phone was a line in the 3rd paragraph. It said that the department was seeking information about applications that may not have been formally recorded. Camille Ortiz sat down on the edge of her bed and reached underneath it and pulled out a shoebox. The interview took place in the Houston field office on a Friday morning, and Della Mercer sat in on it. And afterward she went out into the corridor and had to stand there for a minute with her hand flat against the wall. What was in the shoebox? 1. A printed copy of the internal ethics complaint of June 11th, hand-dated at the top in blue ink, listing 16 customer names, the dates they came in, and the notation given LSCP card beside 11 of them. 2. A printed copy of the second complaint of August 4th, listing 11 more names and dates, with screenshots of her phone list attached and printed. 3. 41 names in total, with dates, spanning from the 12th of February of the prior year through the 4th of August, 5 months of which fell inside the destroyed window. 4. And the thing nobody had anticipated. A printed copy of the automated confirmation email she had received after submitting the first complaint. It contained the routing header. The header showed that a confidential ethics report naming Brent Kessler had been delivered 38 minutes after submission to the mailbox B. Kessler@titanregional.com. That single sheet of paper did 3 things at once. It proved the reports existed. It proved Kessler knew about them and continued anyway, which converted a pattern of conduct into a pattern of knowing conduct. And it established that Titan Regional Bank's compliance architecture routed whistleblower complaints to the subject of the complaint, which was a supervisory failure at the institutional level and which put the bank's general counsel on a plane to Washington within 72 hours. Della Mercer read that header 3 times. Then she asked the question she had come into the room to ask. Miss Ortiz, why did you keep copies? And Camille, who had been holding herself together for 90 minutes and was not entirely holding herself together anymore, said, because my mom told me to, when I was 16. She said keep a copy of everything you put your name on, because you may never need it, but the day you need it, nothing else will do. She wiped her face with the back of her wrist. I thought she was being dramatic. She had a landlord once who... She stopped. It doesn't matter. It matters, Della said. They did not have to charge Hal Duffy. Camille Ortiz's 41 dated names cross-referenced against Lone Star Capital's own loan origination records, which had been subpoenaed in November and which Doyle Prescott's bookkeeper had maintained meticulously, because Doyle Prescott was a man who was careful about the wrong things, reconstructed the referral chain across the destroyed window with a precision that no witness testimony would have matched. 39 of Camille's 41 names appeared in Lone Star's book within 21 days of the date she had written down. The 41st was Yolanda Pruitt. Hal Duffy testified voluntarily in March, without immunity, without a deal, having been told plainly by the prosecutor that he was not a target and might have been. The 24-year-old nobody would listen to turned out to be the only person in the building who kept a file. They brought Brent Kessler in on the 12th of February. He came in a good suit with 2 attorneys, and for the first 40 minutes he was magnificent. He was warm. He was cooperative in tone and useless in substance. He explained lending guidelines to a room containing 3 people who had spent a combined 70 years enforcing them. He said the word relationship 11 times. It's a relationship business. You're trying to find a yes for people. Sometimes the yes isn't here, and you help them find where it is. Della Mercer sat at the end of the table and let him talk, because that is what you do. Then the assistant United States attorney, a woman named Priya Raman, opened a folder and began to place documents on the table, one at a time, face up, in silence. The Lone Star Loan Origination Schedule. The Shell Consultancy's invoices, 5 years of them, 42 payments, $321,000. The bank account records showing each payment landing in Kessler's personal account between 3 and 9 days after each referral closed. The adverse action analysis. 406 applications formally processed, 214 never entered, sorted by applicant. Camille Ortiz's June 11th complaint. And last, the routing header, with his own email address on it, highlighted in yellow. Kessler looked at that one for a long time. His lead attorney said, "We'd like the room." "Take all the time you need," Raman said. They were 40 minutes. When the door opened again, something had gone out of Brent Kessler's face, and it did not come back at any point in the following 14 months. Della Mercer had watched this happen to men before. It is not remorse. She had been very clear with herself about that over the years, and she was clear about it now. What it is the specific moment a person stops being able to tell himself the version of the story he has been living inside. For 5 years, Brent Kessler had told himself he was helping people find a yes. He was now sitting in front of the arithmetic. He asked one question before his attorney could stop him. He asked it looking at the adverse action analysis, not at anyone in the room. How many of them lost the business? Nobody answered him, because it was not a question anybody was authorized to answer, and because the number, 11, at that point, with 2 more to come, was not his to have. He nodded slowly, as if he had been told anyway. Titan Regional Bank settled with the United States in June, without admitting liability, in the customary way of these things. The consent order ran to 61 pages. It required the bank to pay $14,600,000 into a settlement fund for identified applicants, to establish a subsidized lending program in the affected counties, to retain an independent monitor for 4 years, to rebuild its complaint routing architecture so that no report could be routed to a person named in it, and to extend its customer flow data retention from 90 days to 7 years. That last item was 1 paragraph long, and Della Mercer considered it the single most valuable thing in the entire document, because it was the only one that would still be doing work in 2039. Brent Kessler pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit honest services wire fraud and received 51 months. He was permanently barred from participating in the affairs of any federally insured institution. Doyle Prescott pleaded to the same count and received 33 months. Lone Star Capital Partners surrendered its state lending license and its portfolio was sold. Hal Duffy was not charged. He resigned in April, 11 days after his testimony, 5.5 years short of full vesting. He lost the substantial majority of his pension, which is what happens, and which no consent order addresses. He said one thing at the sentencing hearing, from the gallery, when a reporter asked him on the way out whether he felt he had been treated fairly. He stopped on the courthouse steps and thought about it. He was 64 by then and looked older. "I signed what he put in front of me," he said, 63 times. "I've had a year to think about what that makes me, and I still can't come up with a better word for it than 63 times. Then he went and got in his car. The settlement fund paid out over 19 months, which is fast for this. Reginald Boone received a check and a letter. The letter, signed by an assistant United States attorney, stated in plain English what had been done to him, by whom, and that his applications had been qualified. He read it twice and then drove out to a job site and sat in his truck and read it a third time. He bid the school district package again the following spring with a line of credit from a credit union in Lufkin. He won it. He rehired 3 of the 4 men. The fourth, Trey Alcorn, had lost the house in Bellwood and moved to Odessa, and Boone called him anyway, and Alcorn said thank you and no. That is the part of these stories that does not get fixed, and anyone who tells you otherwise is selling something. Yolanda Pruitt received $411,000, the largest single payment out of the fund, calculated on lost business value, and it was not enough, and everybody involved in the calculation knew it was not enough. The building on Magnolia was gone. It had been sold in April to a man from Conroe and was a laundromat by August, and there is no provision in federal law for turning a laundromat back into your mother's bakery. She opened again 2 blocks over, in a smaller space, 11 months later. It has 4 tables instead of 9 and no wedding cake business, because she is 63 and her knee is what it is, and she has decided that is all right. The hospital contract came back. The van is new. The wooden sign from 1974 hangs above the door. It has a scratch across the bottom right corner from where it came off the brackets with a socket wrench, and Yolanda Pruitt declined to have it repaired, and if you ask her about it, she will tell you why. Camille Ortiz left the bank in the spring. She finished the certificate program she had dropped, and then she kept going, and she now works for a nonprofit fair housing organization in Houston that trains matched pair testers for lending and rental investigations across 4 states. The woman who recruited her drove 3 hours to make the offer in person. On Camille's desk there is a shoebox. It is empty. She keeps it there anyway, and when new testers ask about it, and they always ask about it, she tells them about a kitchen table in 1998 and a woman named Rosalind who had a landlord and no copies. Della Mercer went back to Bellwood once. It was a Tuesday in October, 2 years to the week, and she was driving home from something else and she had time, and she pulled off the highway and parked on Magnolia and bought a caramel cake in a small bakery 2 blocks off the main street. She did not say who she was. She was fairly sure Yolanda Pruitt knew anyway. There had been a photograph in the Houston paper, but neither of them said anything about it, and they talked about the weather and about knees, and Della paid cash and left a tip in the jar. Then she drove past the corner of Magnolia and 4th. The bank was still there. Red brick, white columns holding up nothing, flag on the pole. There was a new name on the assistant manager's office and a new sign in the window about a first-time homebuyer program. Through the glass, she could see the chair by the window. There was a young man sitting in it with a folder in his lap, waiting for his name. Della Mercer sat at that light for the length of one long red, and then it turned green and she drove on toward Houston. Here is what she told the new testers. Every class, in the last 10 minutes of the last day, after the scripts and the profiles and the rules of documentation, she would put down the marker and sit on the edge of the table and say, "You are going to want him to say something." In the chair, in that office, You are going to want him to say one clear, ugly sentence you can write down, because that would make it simple, and because it would let everybody watching believe that this only ever happens where people can hear it. He is not going to say it. He is going to be kind to you. He is going to ask about your children. He is going to sit beside you instead of across from you. And he is going to tell you he has been fighting the home office all year, and you are going to walk out to your car and sit there and wonder whether you imagined the whole thing. That feeling, that is the crime. That is what it does. It is built so that the person it happens to cannot ever be quite sure it happened, and so that no one they tell will ever be quite sure either. So we don't argue about what was in his heart. We can't get in there and it doesn't matter. We write down the time, we write down what was in the file. We write down what he did for the man in the chair before us and what he did for us, and we let the two of them sit side by side on a piece of paper. That is the entire method. It is not clever. It is arithmetic and patience. But I want you to know what it is actually made of. And here she would stop, because this was the part that mattered. Every case I have ever closed was closed by somebody who kept a copy. Not by me, not by the department. By a woman who kept 9 years of tax returns in a shoebox. By a man who wrote down the date on a work order. By a 24-year-old on a teller line who printed a complaint at 6:40 in the morning because her mother told her to when she was 16. Nobody read what they wrote for a long time. In 2 of my cases, nobody read it for years. Keep writing it down anyway. Because the whole thing, all of it, every dollar of that fund, every one of those doors that opens now instead of closing, comes down to whether one ordinary person kept a piece of paper and whether one other ordinary person eventually bothered to read it all the way to the end. There is a comfortable idea that the harm in this world announces itself, that it shouts, that it is cruel to your face, that you will always know it when you see it, and therefore that you may safely assume you have never been on the wrong side of it. Brent Kessler coached Little League for 6 seasons. He brought donuts in on Mondays. He remembered the name of your daughter, and he wanted to know how she did at state. He never raised his voice at a customer in 5 years, and when he took a business out from under a 61-year-old woman whose mother had painted the sign above the door in 1974, he did it while sitting in the chair beside her, leaning forward, with his forearms on his knees, sounding like the only friend she had in the building. He was not stopped by an alarm. There was no alarm. He was stopped by a woman who sat in a lobby chair for 91 minutes, with a $4 folder in her lap, and wrote down 11 times on a piece of paper. And by a young woman with a shoebox under her bed who had been told, once, at a kitchen table, to keep a copy of everything she signed. That is usually how it goes. Not with a siren. With somebody, somewhere, quietly refusing to let the record disappear.